Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country and around the world, these are exceptionally precarious, trying, tumultuous times. We've covered it for more than a year and a half, and I am very, very humbled and privileged and grateful to bring to you a guest that's someone that I admire tremendously, has been a real role model for me and so many others in this country. I think one of the finest leaders that we have in the public space, and a guy that's always a voice of sanity, a conscience, and an incredibly inspiring and important American. I'm very, very grateful, especially during Veterans Month, to have the great and powerful General Barry Mccaffrey joins us here on Angry Americans. Welcome, sir.
Well, good to be with you, Paul. And let me, if I may, begin by thanking you for your leadership and protecting the combat veterans of the war on terror, the millions of them that went out there and fought. And as I remind civilian audiences all the time, with 60,000 killed and wounded. So I'm personally grateful that, like Jan Scruggs for the Vietnam War, that you stepped forward and tried to provide supportive leadership to the people you served with.
Well, I appreciate that, sir. I've been following your lead and so many others that came before me, and you guys have taught us that it's one team, one fight, and probably now more than ever. I wish you a happy Veterans Day, a happy Veterans Month, but it's also, I think, the most volatile Veterans Day I've seen in my lifetime. I want to get into that with you. I want to talk about the change at the Defense Department with Secretary Esper being fired. I want to talk about the president and the election and all of it. But I also know you're going to be a great voice of calm for people, of stability, of strength. But you come with a very deep and interesting background. Anybody who's watching can see the room behind you that's filled with history and interesting stuff. But one of the questions we ask of all our guests, especially in times like this when folks need a break from time to time, is what is your drink of choice when you're not on MSNBC, when you're not teaching, when you're not inspiring? Do you have an adult beverage or cocktail of choice that is your preferred one, sir?
Well, I'm not sure it's very adult. It starts with Baskin Robbins and pulling in for a vanilla milkshake, which my spouse of 55 years strictly rations me to. So sign me up for Baskin Robbins wherever they are.
I love it. And it's always a vanilla milkshake? Is that always the one you go for?
That's it. No need to try anything else when you've got perfection.
Excellent. Do you go extra thick, or do you ever throw any malt in there, or is it always just straight Baskin Robbins vanilla milkshake?
Just straight up. That's the only way to go.
Excellent. There's a lot of, I think, alcohol sales are up, but I think ice cream sales are probably dwarfing even that. I've been eating more ice cream than ever. A lot of folks have been eating a lot of ice cream. They've been watching you at night, but anybody who's read up on your history, you've been a leader in the public space now for basically my entire lifetime. I feel like I grew up seeing you on the military stage and then transitioning into the media. But you are also an esteemed academic. You've got a great resume of academic achievement, but I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you started out in Massachusetts, and when you were growing up, General Barry Mccaffrey, what was your first car?
It was an unbelievable car. It's probably the best car I ever had. It was a Pontiac Le Mans with bucket seats and 4 on the floor, blue. I think it was $2,200, which was a frightful amount of money. And my dad advanced me a loan to get it. So when I graduated and got married to my wife of 55 years, that's what we drove away in, was a Pontiac Le Mans.
Wow. What year was it, sir? Do you remember?
1964. Well, actually, maybe it was 63, because we got them our first class senior year at West Point, halfway through the year. And I've never had a feeling of such pride and ownership on any car since then.
That's a beautiful car. What kind of blue was it? What shade of blue was that year of Le Mans?
Well, it was sort of a dark blue, and they were just beautiful cars, very classic. And to this day, I sort of regret when we got rid of that. We went mundane for the next 50 years.
Did you get married at the Cadet Chapel at West Point?
We didn't. We got married in California. My wife was out there.
So this movie scene type situation of you, were you in uniform when you got married?
Civilian clothes.
Civilian clothes, getting into Le Mans, driving off into the California sunset for a life of adventure together?
Yeah, my wife's family were Army. Her dad was class of 42 out of West Point, and he was in some defense industry job in Southern California. Corona del Mar, beautiful. To this day, I love Southern California, San Diego, on up, and so that's where her family was, and we still love the state.
Amazing. So another question I've been asking all of our guests since the pandemic started, sir, for the folks that are listening around the country, around the world, where are you and how are you? How are you and your wife and the people close to you dealing with this pandemic?
Well, we moved out to Seattle. I kept two residences in Northern Virginia and Seattle for several years, and now primarily we're in Seattle. We have a house in Yakima, Washington, the center of the fruit basket of America, and our primary residence is in Seattle. All three of our kids are out here. They all their families are here. We see them more now than we probably did pre-COVID because there's dog wrestling and popcorn eating and socially distanced in the backyard. And I put a big COVID tent up on the entrance to the garage so we can, with heaters. So we're actually doing okay, but I haven't been on an airplane since in January. I used to fly 4 days a week or more. And a lot of Zoom, a lot of Blue Jeans, a lot of Microsoft Team, and staying in contact. So, no more baseball, football. Seattle's an incredible city for restaurants and entertainment and sports, and mostly that's all gone now. Hopefully by next summer, the end of next summer, it'll be back. But that's where we are, and we're doing well.
We talked to Flo Groberg in Seattle in the early days of the pandemic, and then we talked to Kristen Rowe Finkmeyer. I think it was Mother's Day in May in Seattle, and it feels like Seattle was the first place hit. If this COVID war, it was unfolding across the country, and I've used that framework of war, and I know the president's used it, others have, but I really feel like it's come in waves, and we've needed a mobilization and a strategy in many of the same ways I believe we do when battling an existential threat like COVID. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, but can you give us, as a military leader, and I'm going to ask you to, of course, step back and look at the broader landscape in the battle space, but can you talk about what Seattle has done well and what Seattle has done poorly, and what can be learned about Seattle in particular and Washington more broadly?
Yeah. Well, Washington State, Governor Inslee's a very sensible fellow, a lot of integrity, organizational abilities. The state and National Guards pitched in. The health authorities are competent. Seattle itself is a citadel of medical research and medical care. It's just astonishing. World class. University of Washington School of Medicine does a billion-dollar research industry. So the capacity's been pretty impressive. They got organized. They mostly have kept it under control. Part of our problem was COVID, and by the way, Seattle, for those, your viewers who haven't seen it, is one of the most beautiful cities, bar none, in America. But it is closed down. It is eerie. Amazon and Boeing and Microsoft and Expedia and all these great companies have by and large gone to distance involvement. So the ancillary businesses are dying all over the city. Half of them will never come back. And it's a sad thing to see. That's compounded, by the way, and now we're into deep waters, but compounded by what I have termed Seattle City has high integrity government. They don't steal a dime. They're educated, attractive, well-dressed people, well-meaning, but it's a goofy city leadership. The city council has not sustained law enforcement. This is not Black Lives Matter. This is a couple of 300 organized criminals who have threatened the existence of the downtown businesses. And that's another problem. I feel a great sense of sympathy for the Seattle police. I think a lot of them are quitting physically and walking away from the job, and others feel they have zero support from city government. So we've got a problem out here. It's still a great city, great people, tremendous intellectual energy, business energy, but it's in trouble.
They're lucky to have you there. We're lucky to have you here. I love Seattle. I'm so glad you talked about it. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. It's got, you're right about the restaurants and the landscape. My favorite museum in America was the Experience Music Project right next to the Needle. That was such a special place, and the Sci-Fi Museum is downstairs. But I remember the first time I went to Seattle, I think was on my book tour, and folks told me it was one of, if not the most educated city in America. They bought more books than anywhere else on my book tour. And I always remember that. It stuck with me. And I think that it's a place that, is a reflection of so many things that are going right and going poorly in this country. But taking that bigger step back, you've been so important, I think, in sounding the alarm. And you're careful about sounding the alarm. But can you frame up for us on the biggest macro level possible, this moment in history for our country? Where are we? What are we facing, and what do you see on the landscape that you think people need to understand?
Well, boy, that's a profound question. I think if you step back from it, I've spent a lot of time overseas, Europe, the Far East, you name it. And the one thing the international community has always given us, as a matter of respect, there are two things I used to tell that in NATO they would agree to. One is we're great organizers. Yeah, we can organize anything. I mean, World War II, we went from a rural, introverted society to global domination in the space of three years. And the second thing is the international community would always say, we can trust these people. They're not as well educated as our German and French and Italian and Brit compadres, and they got enormous wealth, but when they tell you they'll do something, they'll do it. And I think both of those are in doubt now. I'm just astonished at our inability to address big problems, but problems that aren't all that complex. Protecting the border and yet treating the vital economic contributions of the immigrant Central American Mexican population with dignity, and figuring out some way to let them cross the border and send their money home legally and be protected by OSHA and minimum wage. And we can't organize anything at a national level. Business, fortunately, still works real good. And then I think the other thing is one of our challenges is people don't trust us anymore in the international community. And inside the country, I think Mr. Trump has found fissures that were there, cultural, political, economic, some of them real. Occasionally he comes up with good ideas, strong military, protect our borders, protect American manufacturing, but he can't get anything done. He's got no character. So I actually think, the country is sound. 325 million hardworking people. In your day-to-day life in this country, you don't run into people that almost ever that you don't respect. They tell you they're going to do something, you can trust their word. I think we're in trouble. So I think what I welcome, I know Mr. Biden fairly well, and he's a civil, decent, family-oriented guy with enormous experience. All he's got to do is step in and start acting in accordance with American values. And I think we're going to be far better off.
I always appreciate your candor. You're a no bullshit guy, but you always can see, the road ahead and see what's up on in the future. And I think folks need to hear that right now because it feels stressful. It feels chaotic. a lot of folks celebrated the election and maybe had 24 hours to enjoy a result, and then reality comes back in that we're still facing some huge challenges as a country. I hope that Mr. Biden is reaching out to you on a regular basis and seeking your counsel, or at least watching you on television. But can you break down your thoughts on the election? What did it show us about our country? What opportunities and challenges does it present?
Well, boy, I tell you, the most prized asset in military leaders is objectivity. I mean, what you're hoping for is somebody that looks at the situation, looks for the facts, and makes some common sense decision. And that has been lacking. I think the biggest fear I have is that the country is so divided, so angry. So it's hard for me to understand how anyone could support Mr. Trump because of his fundamental lack of integrity and character. He's a bully, he's impulsive, he's ignorant. He acts in a racist manner. Whether he's a racist is another thing. He can't be trusted with his own team. I mean, I can't imagine a worse leadership environment than working for this guy. So it's just been appalling. But 70 million Americans looked at this situation and said, for one reason or another, we're voting for this guy. I think part of the challenge to Mr. Biden, never mind the Democratic Party, which is in disarray. Republican Party's gone. Now a Trumpist cult. They better listen to why do blue-collar workers and, those derogatory term, those that are college education, why are they voting for Trump? And even worse, in my impression, why did the majority of white folk vote for Mr. Trump? We are a multiracial society. That's good, not bad. But I don't want to see us get divided where race and ethnicity for that matter, or political affiliation. I actually don't have any predisposition to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. I've never signed up for either one, trying to remain objective. But here we are in one hell of a mess, similar to 1860. And now we better find a way to come together and start common sense decision making and listen to each other.
Sir, can you talk about 1860? Can you build on that? Can you explain to us what you see as the parallels here?
Well, I think the parallel is, some of the polling data is just unnerving. It's chilling. I try and read 4 newspapers every day, and the little insights you get from good reporting are just amazing. A Trump supporter says, as far as he's concerned, if Trump wanted to stay in office for 50 years and hand it to his children in turn, that would be okay. Wow. I've been sort of talking about Mr. Trump being a unfunny Mussolini, but that's bordering into mass cult, dangerous political behavior. So, again, I think there's some things to be concerned about. I've got friends who I trust and value. They're educated people, and it's like an alternative universe talking about why to support Trump. So again, in comes Mr. Biden, this terribly sharp Kamala Harris, and they better reach out and listen to these people. One of the worst things I saw in politics was during the primaries when Beto O'Rourke, who's got a pretty face and a lot of energy and very verbal guy, stood there, and there was some kind of interview going on, and some reporter asked him a provocative question, and he said, words to the effect, "You bet your life, we're coming to get your guns." Right. Oh my God.
Right.
First of all, we're not taking guns away from Americans. We're not going to be Australia or the UK. baked into our DNA. But this is a kind of opening salvo that further cements anger and divisiveness. Instead of saying, well, guns is an issue. We got a terrible murder rate compared to most civilized countries. So we need things like, ID check for criminal behavior on the part of everybody who buys a gun for any reason. And we need to modify our rules so we try and get the semi-automatic or automatic bump stock weapons. So there's a lot of things you can do, but you don't start off by saying we're going to take the guns away from hunters in Texas. You're just asking for severe confrontation.
So, sir, I want to build on that in a way that I think you're in a unique position to do. I have said that there are some parallels that I see right now, and I know it may feel like an extreme example, to what happened in Iraq after Saddam went down. And there was a structure and a system that was empowered and supportive of Trump, of Saddam, and the things that were around him. And then we came in and famously de-Baathified the country. When I was there, Bremer and others, essentially fired thousands of angry, loyal people with guns and didn't give them an alternative in the future. And those people became the foundation of the insurgency that I and so many others had to fight and still, sprawls today. I feel like Biden needs to be very clear in presenting an alternative and a part of the future to exactly those people you're talking about that are sparked by Beto O'Rourke, the people who feel like maybe the Democrats are coming for their guns, and maybe they feel like socialism is coming, and they're scared and they're angry and they're organized and they want to be a part of the future. And I've said you can't, all the Trump supporters aren't just going to go away any more than you can kill away all the terrorists. And they're different. I know that. But I think we saw an example of if you don't give people an alternative, it will result in very bad domestic national security issues. And that's one of the many things I'm concerned about right now is the small violence, the angry folks that feel like they don't have a part in this future. Can you talk about what you see in relation to that? What can Biden do and say specifically to Trump supporters? And where do you see that on the priority list as we look at a very tumultuous 2 months of a lame duck and likely a volatile couple of months in the early part of next year?
Yeah. Well, by the way, I couldn't agree with you more about the history lesson out of Iraq. That was just astonishing, basic, fundamental lack of judgment. And it ended up with thousands of U.S. soldiers getting killed, Marines getting killed and wounded because Mr. Bremer and Rumsfeld, oh my God, what a terrible man. What an arrogant person, incapable of listening to other viewpoints, with a group of advisors around them that were, again, high IQ and no judgment. The old saying, they knew the price of everything but the value of nothing. And so we ended up in this mess, and you can't take apart the institutions of a society. My dad fought in Italy in World War II, wonderful soldier, and he fought in Korea and Vietnam. But in Italy, he said, the last days of the war, his division, the famous 92nd Infantry Division, African American, pulls up into Milan, and he said the locals had risen up and they locked up all the Milan police officers. And so for 3 days, they were settling scores all over the city, murdering people. And finally, he said his division commander said, let the cops out, tell them to get back on the beat. So you simply can't evaporate the structure of a society and not expect that the bad guys will come out on top. I think we got a worse problem than violence. The election, to my delight and against my fears, was largely peaceful all over America. Some of these Trump convoys were a little troublesome, but basically, there were a couple of jurisdictions where a local judge said you can publicly carry semi-automatic weapons in the vicinity of polling places. But by and large, it was a peaceful election. I suspect that will continue. If there are outbreaks of violence, for sure the U.S. Armed Forces aren't going to be involved in it. But our police forces at municipal and county and state level are extremely effective. So I don't think the violence in any way imperils democracy going forward. What I fear is total warfare, gridlock. I think the Republicans are going to end up owning the Senate for another couple of years. And will Mitch McConnell, will people like Rob Portman, who I've had tremendous respect for, are they going to say, well, we got a country to govern. We got to work with these people. And Biden's a conciliator. He's a mediator. He's a guy that knows how to work toward compromise. Can they end the chaos inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C.? The jury's out. And then finally, I think we're seeing, a mixed bag at state level. Governor Mike DeWine, somebody I've worked with in the past, a magnificent public servant. He's a model, along with other governors, of common sense governance. And we got to reach out to these people and listen to them. Because right now, a lot of the Trump supporters I talk to, they're educated, good people, but God, they think the election was stolen. They're convinced the whole thing was a fraud. One of my friends is a former CIA station chief. She's used to looking objectively for evidence at foreign countries and figuring out what's going on. And yet she's convinced that 80% of the Republicans think it was a fraudulent election. If you lack legitimacy in your democratic process, how can you govern? So we have some work to do. And I need to see Republican senators and congressmen step forward. And, what's so bad about getting run out of office if that's what it takes to make a statement for America's future?
I'm glad you talked about the political division in such a focused way, because we've talked a lot on this show about how so many Americans are hungry for alternatives. 40% of the country is unaffiliated independent. I'm independent. You're independent. Many folks who voted and had a huge impact on this election in places like Arizona and Pennsylvania are independent. And the parties seem to be going in opposite directions. I got into a Twitter discussion with AOC this weekend, and at the same time, I'm criticizing the Trump administration. And I'm in this space that I know you're in, and John McCain was in, and Joe Biden's been in. But the middle feels lost right now. There is no legitimate independent party. Independent candidates, for the most part, have been a joke or haven't really caught on, except maybe going back to Ross Perot. Where do you see the opportunity politically for alternatives or for breaking, if the Republicans won't move and they're going to stay calcified, and the Democrats are maybe going to be torn in two between moderates and left-wingers, but will still be viewed by many as too far left? Is there a space in the middle for guys like you and me? Or if not, what do we need to do as Americans to create it?
That AOC is fascinating to me. By sort of start, this is one of the most talented politicians that has emerged in America in the last 25 years.
Absolutely.
And I was thrilled when she got elected, because as you remember, the number 3 Democrat in the House who had represented that district didn't have a home there. His kids weren't going to school there. He wasn't even gone by. He was, living in D.C. and playing power politics. So AOC emerges from her bartender job with her flashing good looks and her high IQ and knocks him out of the saddle. I felt good about that. That's how democracy is supposed to work. And if I'd lived in her district, I would have voted for her too. Now, having said that, there's almost nothing she's talking about that will work in America. And so I think 75% of Americans are not signing up for much of what she says. And that's also a problem, So when you look at the American people as a whole, and you say, what are the issues that concern them? And it always starts with jobs. And then it goes to their kids and school. And they talk about, they're worried about health care, which is unaffordable and disorganized in America. And they actually are worried about their security too. They want a black mother living in a central city wants a decent law enforcement establishment protecting her. But she's getting on the bus every morning, going to her nursing job. So the American people aren't screwed up. The political party leadership is. Now, another thing, I'm 77 years old, in great health. My mother lived to 100, my dad in the late 90s. But having said that, I want to see younger people in political leadership positions. This is nonsense. Candidates for the presidency of the United States ought to be age 60 or under. Now, I get accused of ageism, which is probably a federal crime now for saying that. We need move a new generation in there. Nancy Pelosi, I know, she's an elegant woman, educated. She shouldn't be the Speaker of the House, for God's sakes. I think she's 80. You know, what's going on? Why can't Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, with his, 2 or 3 combat tours as a Marine, why can't he be the Speaker of the House? It's time to, senior people ought to know when it's time to let go and let another generation get in there. We need to, and if we can't do that, then we need a new party. New parties don't have a good record in this country, though, as you've already pointed out. They normally last one election and then fall apart. And they put some charismatic person with no judgment in as their candidate. So, but I think we're on the verge of a third party if the political leadership can't pull themselves together. Some of these Republicans, Cruz, Marco Rubio with his pretty face and all these guys, they're terrible, terrible people, no integrity. How did they get up in public office? So we need to start registering people to vote, and we ought to start with the 18-year-olds and work our way up.
I appreciate that. I think you're going to have a lot of support from a lot more young people after this conversation. You are candid in all that you do. We've talked a lot on this show about issues that have people righteously angry. President Obama actually talked about this message that we've had over the last year and a half on this show, specifically in the last couple of weeks. But we say if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. There are things to be. Everybody's a little angry. What they do with it and how they react with it differs. But General Barry McCaffrey, you're a master of cool. You always stay calm under pressure. You've been shot at more times than probably anybody I know. But even you get angry. So General Barry McCaffrey, what makes you angry?
Oppression, lack of integrity, politicians who know better, who are smart people, who are saying things that are patently wrong to remain in power. I spent a lot of time in and out of D.C., and one of the older mentors to me when I was a strategic planner for the Joint Staff, and he said, a lot of people in this town actually don't care about outcomes. They're grading each other on style and on one-upsmanship and who is the dominant voice in the room, but they actually don't, and they stay here forever. And that makes me angry. And by the way, I say that as somebody that there's little pockets in Washington of people who are dreadfully serious about what they do and aren't doing that. The CIA, the armed forces leadership, normally not in this administration, the National Security Council has these phenomenally capable, experienced people. So there's pockets of people around town who are always able to work the interagency process. By the way, the most carefully selected people in our government are Foreign Service officers, now being decimated by Mr. Pompeo. So I think the thing that makes me angry is, you don't see that in business, for God's sakes. If you went and randomly selected an Army infantry battalion and went in there and say, hey, how's this place operate, Command Sergeant Major? And you looked at the leadership and what they're up to, mostly they're straightforward, high integrity, courage. That's what I normally find in business. Our problem is our political leadership has been lousy. and getting worse for 20 years.
And that political leadership, I think, has gotten even worse in the last couple of weeks. You've been outspoken about the developments at the Pentagon. I have been, other folks have been. I feel like America sort of woke up for a second, but they're still not paying attention enough. And I don't think most folks understand enough the severity of what I see happening at the Pentagon. And you've been talking about in the last couple of days in the media. But I want to give you space to talk about this. The president has fired Secretary of Defense Esper. Now more and more folks are leaving from senior leadership. I think it's maybe the most precarious time I've seen at the Pentagon in recent memory. Can you talk about, you said on TV you're alarmed, and you don't get alarmed very often. Can you talk about what you see and why you're alarmed?
Yeah. First of all, you got to start with, is there any reason to believe that Mr. Biden didn't win the election to be the next president? The answer is no. He's going to be the next president. So I set that aside. It's just a given. So between now and 20 January at noon, what's going to happen? And, we've always had, people like me are fundamentally optimists about the American people and American institutions. It always works out. We had the Gore-Bush election, I got it. But basically, both of them were good, law-abiding, experienced people. This is different. Poor Mr. Trump is flailing about. He's emotionally fragile. He has no sense of the rule of law or respect for the Constitution. I doubt he's ever read a copy of it, never mind had a class on it. And I think he is capable of trying anything. And so, when everybody's saying, no, give him space, he's just trying to come to grips with it. Oh, no, I don't think so. If you're watching an enemy adversary state, what you do is you read what they're writing and saying to each other. Mm-hmm. And then you have a pretty good assumption that that's what they'll actually do, what they're talking to each other. What Mr. Trump is doing, we had Mr. Pompeo, West Pointer, Harvard Law School graduate, say, we're going to be having a change of power, all right, the second term for Mr. Trump. But when he started putting loyalists into the Department of Defense, we only got 3 coercive institutions: Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and Department of Defense. Department of Defense, a lot of Americans don't know this, the uniformed military have no authority to give orders to the 9 joint combatant commanders. It's 2 civilians, the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense. Mark Esper was actually extremely well qualified and knowledgeable to be the Secretary of Defense. His problem was the President of the United States, and he had to walk a line there, which he's going to be maligned by history. But at the end of the day, he's just an honorable, capable guy. When they fired him and stuck this Chris Miller in there, Chris has a good reputation as a combat leader. He's probably a good guy. He's completely unqualified to be the Secretary of Defense. Then they've got 4 marginal characters moving in with him. I mean, this retired 1-star, Tata, I guess you pronounce his name, is a dangerous guy. He's a little firebrand. He has no judgment. And say, why would anybody, by the way, accept a job in government for 90 days? So my conclusion is some of the nutcakes over in the White House talking to the president are laying the groundwork for him to declare the election was invalid and he's not leaving office. Everybody says, oh, come on, don't be an alarmist. Oh, you ought to believe your own eyes. And so I think this is really worth being concerned about. The only bar on these guys' behavior, if they call in Mark Milley, who's a terrific leader. I've known him since he was a colonel. He's courageous. He's a big Princeton athlete. He's smart as a whip. He's really a tough guy. But if he gets a legal order from acting Secretary of Defense, who's probably, by the way, illegally appointed, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, I don't see how you bypass him under the current law. But if he gets a legal order, I think what he'll do is pick up the phone and he'll call both parties in Congress and tell them, here's what I've been instructed to do. But basically the armed forces will follow legal orders. This is not a normal situation. We ought to be concerned about what's going on.
So you mentioned Tata, who called President Obama a terrorist and a Manchurian candidate. He's been Islamophobic and I think dangerous in many respects. You mentioned General Milley. We're all now on watch to see if Trump tries to fire General Milley, which I believe is within his power. He could do that, right, and probably get tremendous pushback. But frankly, he hasn't gotten that much pushback on Esper, so he may try it. I feel like you've got a guy who's solidifying power, and he's starting in the most powerful place. If I were going to try to solidify power, I'd start with the Pentagon too. I'd start with the place with the guns and the power and the strength. But beyond being alarmed, people have been asking me this, and I can't think of anybody else better than you. What should we do? What should we do right now? We see this, we're alarmed. What should average citizens do? I know you're going to talk to members of Congress, I hope as well, but what should we do to respond to this? I've called him a political suicide bomber. Trump just blows up everything in his path. I've called him President Mayhem. President Mayhem is now attacking our Pentagon. What do we do about it, sir?
Well, I'm not being facetious. One thing we do is pray, because the elections happened. And so my guess is, by the way, that at the end of the day, Mr. Biden assumes office on the 20th, and the chaotic environment in the center of our government stops. The other thing I tell you is there is zero possibility of the service chiefs, the senior leadership, uniformed leadership of the armed forces, supporting a coup. That's never going to happen. The armed forces are the boys and girls of America, and they're under military discipline. They swore an oath to the Constitution. There is zero chance of that. And by the way, poor Mr. Trump, he's taken over the wrong institution. The ones to worry about are Homeland Security and Department of Justice. Some of the most wonderful people in government are in the FBI. They're inculcated with the law. They're investigators. They're not goons. But if they fire Chris Wray and put an acting in there then you got a tool that might be useful in oppressing the outcome of an election. So I actually don't think Mr. Trump knows what he's doing. But what I do fear is a real confrontation. The chairman of the JCS has a 4-year term. The Senate approved him, I think, unanimously. So the question is, would the Congress tolerate firing the chairman of the JCS? And if they did, can you appoint an acting chairman? Can he serve in office without Senate confirmation? The Constitution said you, as an infantry lieutenant, had your commission approved by the Senate. The big roll of guys and gals who went over there, but Mr. Trump's been ignoring that for a couple of years. He's just putting people in office. I think the most likely outcome is some really incredible instructions coming out of the acting Secretary of Defense in the next 90 days. Not go seize ballot boxes, but impulsive orders to withdraw all forces from Afghanistan by Christmas Eve. Mr. McGregor coming in. he's a bright guy. He's a defense intellectual. Doug McGregor, who writes good books and thinks about issues. He's also an extremist. He was making comment. They were considering to be the U.S. ambassador to Germany, and there was an uprising of people saying, "Wait, this guy is trying to excuse German behavior in World War II, anti-Semitic kind of conversation." So he's going to be an advisor to the acting Secretary of Defense. Oh my God, what is going on here? So those senators over there on the Hill better wake up. The history is going to make a harsh judgment of them if they allow this to go to an actual confrontation.
So That is the breakdown I was hoping for from you. I want to ask you a really specific question. You say Mr. Trump. I notice you're very deliberate in saying Mr. Trump. Is there a reason you don't say President Trump?
Well, normally, by the way, every president of the United States, and I've been alive and, in uniform or in civil government, there isn't one of them, whether I voted for him or not, who I wouldn't publicly treat with great respect because of the office of the land, because they get elected by the American people. Some of them weren't all that attractive. I used to literally worship President George H.W. Bush. I thought, I don't know how good a politician he was, but he was a model of an American patrician and how to live your life. And so, but all of them, whether I liked them or not, I'd be very respectful. I'm not respectful of this guy at all. I think he's been a disaster. I don't trust him. I think he's got bad judgment. I don't think he knows where Croatia is. I don't think he knows some of it's comical stuff. I mean, that all you got to know about Mr. Trump is the White House press conference where he's looking at that poor White House opioid task force member, Dr. Burke, and he says, we ought to introduce bleach. And are you kidding me? I mean, you couldn't have gotten a fourth grader to come up with that thought. So this is an angry, impulsive man. I'm not saying he doesn't have some decent principles of ideas, defend the borders and stuff like that, but he's a disaster. And the sooner we get him out of there, the sooner this country can start getting back on track.
You tell it like it is, sir. And that's one of the reasons why I think I have so much respect for you, and the country has looked to you in these times, especially. How many times over the last few decades when issues of military conflict or crisis are emerging, and you look up on television and there's General Barry McCaffrey. And I think some of the conversations you had with Brian Williams especially are really important for the country. I feel like they're a masterclass on leadership, but also on civility and on this country. In my view, we are one of the most important voices out there, and a patriot. You're also a positive guy, and you keep it positive, and you inspire others. You have an amazing family around you, and you live a really rich life. And in times like this, people are looking for hope and inspiration. So General McCaffrey, what makes you happy?
Well, look, I wake up every morning grateful, for starters, that I'm not, carrying a gun in a rifle platoon in Vietnam or Iraq or wherever. I've got hot showers and a loving family, and by and large, you can trust the police and local government. And it's almost impossible, people don't understand this, to bribe a federal official. So mostly, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but mostly our contracts and all that aren't like the rest of the world. This is really a decent place to live. And so it's worth fighting for and sustaining. Normally I'm talking to a civilian group, like I love Rotary. So if I'm talking to a Rotary group, I'll start off with, look, you got to understand that this is the wealthiest society in human history. And I've got a series of slides that talk about our agricultural capability and our development of pharmaceuticals and aviation. By the way, COVID's thrown a lot of this off track, but basically we're an incredible society. And I used to be amused. We have foreign officers here in our schooling system, all the services. And we used to, the first ones, I got the Russians into the Air War College at Montgomery, Alabama. Some high IQ, shiny colonel. He came with his family. And at graduation, that son of a gun, he already had his family in hiding. He walked across the stage, took his diploma, and disappeared into the crowd. So I had to call in the Russian military attaché, this drunken, foolish idiot. And I used to get a lot of laughs around. I'd say, I told the guy, I said, no, don't be worried about this. Our guys that defect, if they had a chance too. So we lose tons of foreign officers and NCOs, and they're in the United States. They disappear into the woodwork. My wife's grandfather had a giant farm in World War II, with grain, and he had a dozen German POWs there.
Mhm.
And at the end of the war, they all disappeared into American society. We have a remarkable country. The American people are hardworking, they're civil, they're spiritual, although that's changing also. They are accepting a multiracial society. In the armed forces, you can't walk in a room and not look up and see around the table there's a woman and a black guy and a brown guy, and you look at their rank and you're sure they're qualified for the job they're in. So, I think the country's in good shape. We just need to work on our political leadership.
That's the message we need right now, I think. And I hope that political leadership, I know you probably would be reluctant to do it. I hope it includes you. I hope they pull you inside for any number of critical jobs, or at least as an advisor, because I think you really do understand what's happening, and you bring a sense of calm. And I think we need that right now. We need calm and we need thoughtfulness. And we say on this show, stay vigilant and stay frosty. I feel like you are the embodiment of staying frosty, no matter what's happening in this country. So we are exceptionally grateful for you, for all your leadership sacrifices throughout your life. And I think especially now. I mean, you've done some amazing things for this country, sir, but I think you may be needed right now and in the months to come more than any other point in your lifetime. So we are grateful for you. I would like to express that gratitude in the form of gifts. We cannot do that in person as I would like to, but I'll do it virtually. And the first thing I've got for you, if you head out into that amazing, I would love to see the bivouac you've created out there, because nothing's better than an infantry guy, getting into a backyard. You should see what I've done to my garage. But anyway, I'm going to send you an Angry Americans t-shirt and some gear made by the veterans of Oscar Mike. It's also incredibly comfortable. If you don't want to put it in your milkshake, or you want to give it as a gift, I will send you some Uncle Nearest 1884 whiskey, small batch whiskey. They've been a great supporter of ours and an amazing story. And then the last gift, we've been doing this for all of our guests, but it's also kind of a Rorschach question for the show. The famous Easter candies, Peeps, come in 3 colors: blue, yellow, and pink. General Barry McCaffrey, which color would you choose and why?
There's absolutely no question. It's the blue. It's infantry blue. Yesterday, I was wearing my infantry tie for the interviews, and that's where my heart and soul is. I used to tell people I wasn't trying to be famous. I was just trying to be famous at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Well, you are now famous at Fort Benning, Georgia. We've said it before on this show. For folks that haven't heard it before, we used to say it all the time. Why is the sky blue? Because God loves the infantry, right? And you represent the finest of the infantry, sir. And you are now famous at Fort Benning. I promise you that. The schoolhouse that I went to and so many others went to, you are famous there and respected there. And we have just so much gratitude for all that you do and all that you are. Please keep it up. Please, folks need some orders nowadays, and they're not getting it from the president. So in your special way, if you can give us, some guidance and some orders every time you're on television, everything you do, we're standing by to follow your lead and to have your back. General Barry McCaffrey, thank you so much for being with us and for all you do.
Paul, good being with you. Make sure you stay strong to take care of the Iraq-Afghanistan war veterans, which includes my son and a lot of my students.
Yes, sir. Will do. I'll follow orders. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Okay, good to be with you,
Hey,
Paul.
Frosty.